Hello again and welcome back to the UK edition. No guesses which issue has been to the fore on people's mind this week. It's some revelations relating to Member of Parliament Keith Vaz, arguably a private affair, but one certainly that has had a public fallout. Mr. Vaz has quit as chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. There have been many related public matters that the committee has been considering, and we'll speak with Belinda Brooks Gordon from Birkbeck about those issues and where Mr. Vaz might stand in relation to them. Dr. Brooks Gordon, the Home Affairs Select Committee has been considering proposals to criminalize the one paying for sexual services rather than the one offering them. This is a bold new move. It's been in practice in a few countries. Where is it at in Britain?
The Home Affairs Committee looked at all the evidence and they said that there was no evidence to suggest that criminalising clients helped either the client, the seller or society. And they were quite right to reach that conclusion because that is exactly where all the academic evidence leads. The actual law to criminalise clients emerged from Sweden. And it emerged, very interestingly, at a time of very febrile atmosphere in Sweden, when Sweden was discussing having a referendum about whether to join the European Union or not. And the discourse around criminalising prostitution emerged because there'd been a lot of inward migration into Sweden. Some were prostitutes from Nigeria, and there was a little bit of public nuisance, and they emerged as scapegoats in an immigration argument around the referendum. And then that continued while Sweden were exporting and advocating this law. They were then going through another referendum, which they then had in 2003, about whether to join the euro or not. And just to explain how febrile things were in that country when this referendum was ongoing, Cabinet Minister Anna Lindh was murdered, not unlike, you know, tragically Joe Cox was murdered.
So there were particular situations in Sweden at that time?
Very particular situations that ended up slanting the discourse and making prostitutes scapegoats. All the evidence analysing that law subsequently from a number of research scholars, Jay Levy's work, for example, is just one, a very good PhD from the University of Cambridge, showed not only did it not help the sex workers' situation, but it actually made things worse. Because if you de facto criminalise anybody's clients, it makes their working life much harder and much more vulnerable.
Sure. Now, this question has come up in Britain, of course, because of the controversy surrounding Mr. Keith Vaz. Now, he has chaired the select committee that has considered this question. Is there an issue here, whatever one's personal views on this, is there an issue here about conflict of interest or non-disclosure of certain kinds at certain levels?
I don't think there's a conflict of interest at all. In a lot of circumstances, when people are giving evidence to a committee, experience is taken as expertise. So that's not the case, I believe. You know, the issue arose and was put before the committee subsequent to work by the all-party parliamentary group on prostitution, the APPG. So it wasn't that Mr. Vaz set the remit for this at all. This came to him, and he had also chaired a select committee many years ago on trafficking, at which prostitution was discussed and evidence was heard. So it hasn't arisen from him. The issue of disclosure is another issue. It would have been better for him had he disclosed. I have some sympathy.
Better for him, but it's not a requirement under law or under parliamentary practice, but do you think it would have been better if he had disclosed it? So when we say better, are we speaking about a preferable context?
I think in terms of yes, in terms of the way it's playing out in the media and in terms of the way people are talking about it on social media, it would have been better had he disclosed, in the way that Crispin Blunt, the previous Justice Minister, had disclosed that he had used poppers, and there was a little bit of a flurry of, you know, Victorian sort of mopping of brow by some of the media, which does hold a lot of hypocrisy, it has to be said, about this issue. And a number of media people who have interviewed me and said, oh, well, it's nonsense, the law isn't it, and then write pieces, you know, abhorring the laws and everything else,
Yeah.
being pretending to be scandalised. So I think, I have a degree of sympathy with Mr. Vaz because he wasn't doing anything illegal at all. Paying or selling sex is not illegal in England.
Soliciting is.
He was, yes, soliciting
So
is.
that is not an issue here.
But soliciting is defined as soliciting on the street. It isn't, on social media, on Grindr. I mean, the law hasn't actually caught up with the way the landscape of prostitution has moved. But one of the things the law should be looking at, and that's what the Home Affairs Committee was looking at, whether these behaviours ought to be criminalised or not.
Right. Again, disclosure would be an issue, whether he needed to make any personal disclosures while considering this.
It would have been sensible for him to get it out in the open. You can understand, though, given the moral censure around buying and selling sex, you can understand why he didn't. But that's the only thing that I think that the whip should be sort of talking to him about. Otherwise, it's an issue between him and his family. What he did was no different to what a previous minister, John Whittingdale, who arguably is in a different situation, because you can argue there could be worry about blackmail when somebody's a minister in government and privy to government material. But Mr. Vaz was not in that situation. He was not privy to that kind of information. He was actually chairing the committee. Now, one would argue the best thing for him to have done would have been to disclose and not chair that aspect of the committee. Or he didn't even need to disclose. He could have had somebody else chair those aspects of the committee, because it was quite wide-ranging. But other than that, he hasn't done anything legally wrong at all.
Right. You spoke of paupers. Now, that also has been an issue that the Select Committee has considered.
Yes.
There was, according to reports that we can share and we have seen in the public, there was some reference to paupers. What exactly are paupers to start with?
Poppers, to my understanding, are still, and names change the whole time, amyl nitrate. So it's a chemical that gives people a high that increases their heightened sexual pleasure.
Right. And so this issue of paupers was considered by the Select Committee. It certainly came up. Again, is there an issue about disclosure here?
You can argue that there would have been, but they're not against the law. So, it is as legal, at the moment, it is as legal as alcohol.
Right. So this is about attitudes. It's
Yes.
not about the law.
Yes.
Speaking of attitudes, I mean, there's no getting away from this. Are sexual practices and sexual attitudes in tune? I mean, are there aspects of the law governing sexual conduct in this country, aspects that you are entirely happy with?
Well, it's interesting because politicians' attitudes, when you look at some of the discourses in the law, from the Home Affairs Sexual Offences Seminar in 1999 through to the Sex Offences Act in 2003, the Policing and Crime Act 2009, politicians' attitudes lag behind those of the public. The general public, when you look at them with big opinion surveys like YouGov did and Ipsos Mori have done, when you ask people questions, 59% of people say that prostitution is an activity people should be able to choose if they want. That's 59%. 2/3 of the general public feel, what's the fuss? When it's between consenting adults, what's the fuss about?
Is there a little more fuss when it comes to male? In attitude, not in law.
In some sectors of society, possibly, in others not at all. Now, let me explain that. The police are more likely to turn women out of premises if they're advertising, or if they think, because there are premises closure orders in this country, if somebody is selling sex or thought to be selling sex, the police can turf them out of premises. We have not yet ever seen a case of men being turned out of premises, even when the police know sex work is being bought and sold. They may inspect the premises to make sure there's no trafficking or no drugs, and yet they leave the people working there alone. That doesn't happen with women as much. So the police are more lenient with men selling to men. The public, certainly sex and gay community, there's a lot more definitely a lot more acceptance, not least because also male sex work does tend to be a lot more opportunistic than female sex work. For example, in certain aspects of the gay community, if very often an older, wealthy man is attracted to a younger man and the younger man says, no, I'm not interested, if money's offered, then he may then say yes. And that's much more common. That informal, opportunistic transactional sex is much more common in gay relationships than it is in heterosexual relationships. So it varies depending on which part of the community you are.
Right. What is the extent and scale of commercial sex work in this country?
Well, the actual amount of, according to the information we've gotten, there was a big study done just last year by the Office of National Statistics. We know that there are 72,000 people involved in sex work. That has actually changed from the past when there were less people involved in sex work, but those involved in sex work now are doing it very often. There's quite a large number of people, about 50% of those in sex work, are using sex work and commercial sex to supplement other salaries or student grants or other kind of paid work. So there are more people doing it, but at a lower scale. And sex workers' practices have changed. Instead of working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, with the shift online and the internet, a lot of sex workers will go on tour, book their appointments and work in one city, work 1 week a month in a city, 4 days, and book out different hotels.
Is there a gender breakdown that we have? Do we have within
this?
There
is. The Office of National Statistics did that breakdown, and they found that nearly 30% of sex work is made up of male and transgender sex work. So it's expanding. Male sex work has increased, definitely.
Why? This is not the traditional pattern.
That I don't know why. I can tell you the numbers. I don't know why. I can speculate that it is to do with the lowering a greater acceptance of same-sex relationships, which we've seen in legislation with same-sex marriage and civil partnerships and everything else. So greater acceptance of that. With transgender sex workers, some transgender sex workers do sex work to save up for their operations because it's such a long time now for the queue to get their operation. So there are different motives. A lot of male sex work as well. There's often a lot of links with either bar work or working in porn films and what have you. Sometimes people will work in porn and build up a name for themselves, and that is then their brand. So there's a lot more movement in and out of different sectors than there used to be.
We've had a lot of members of parliament here making very sharp comments about Mr. Vaz. Is this more to do with politics and their personal prejudices than anything Mr. Vaz may have done?
I don't know if it's about personal prejudice or whether it is about political hypocrisy, because that is the thing that the public don't like. And if they end up feeling Mr. Vaz has been hypocritical, they'll turn. But if the politicians who are casting the first stone here, to use a biblical metaphor, are then found to be less than whiter than white, then that opprobrium will end up being heaped on them. But I think there's a little bit of a rush to judgment. A lot of politicians seem to be enjoying this in a way that is out of proportion, in my view, as somebody who's researched this area for 30 years, out of proportion for what he's done and out of proportion for what other MPs have done when they've ended up standing aside from their duties.
Last thoughts. Do you think Mr. Vaz will survive this politically, personally?
So long as, yes I do, if there are no more revelations and Mrs. Vaz is standing by him, and if he does a mea culpa, instead of blaming the press, and he does a mea culpa and says, yes, I was wrong, and doesn't try and blame it on anything else, I was under stress or anything else, but just leaves it at that, makes a statement like that, yes I do, I think he could. And he could end up gaining credence. Some politicians have emerged with more credence. It actually gives me a little bit more interest in him instead of him grandstanding on these committees. The fact that he has had some personal experience of transactional sex, I think, is actually quite a valuable thing when legislators are making those decisions. Sometimes they're rushed to judgment. I don't think any MPs should actually go to Parliament without having spent a night in prison, because prison is terrible and does nobody any good. And so sometimes learning how others live can be a very good thing.
Belinda, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
You're welcome, thank you.
Many questions arising there and more for us to consider. But we take a quick break now and then return to that question, which of us would take that Air China flight anywhere? Welcome back. Now we heard about that Air China magazine article warning passengers against entering Indian, Pakistani black areas in Britain. That article was withdrawn, but after very strong objections and after firm intervention, among others by Mr. Virendra Sharma, Member of Parliament, who wrote to the Chinese ambassador in London about this. The memory of that article will not be so easily withdrawn. We spoke with Mr. Sharma shortly before Air China withdrew that magazine. Mr. Sharma, this is, to put it politely, a bit unusual, is it not, for an airline to say this to its passengers?
It's very strange why they have chosen this route to advise or give the tips to their passengers who are visiting London or other parts of UK is strange. I never expected such a reputable airline to say these kind of things about any particular communities or individuals.
Well, you know, some people may think such things, but to actually say it and in print, that's a bit brazen, is it not?
Yeah. People have their prejudices. We need to accept that. But putting that in a black and white by an organization or institution is unacceptable, and they need to be challenged.
Presumably, the airline has no problem in accepting money from Indian, Pakistani and black passengers.
Of course, are they going to ask the passengers before they do that, we don't want your money, we don't want you as a passenger? Or are they going to ask their passengers first what color you are, because nowadays people can book online. But my question is that they are creating the fears in the minds of those people who may be visiting London or other parts first time, never had the contact with the black and Asian people before. They will read that. By that means that you are scared, you are reluctant to talk to those people or move into those areas. We are living in a very global economy, global community, where we will be traveling around, and then this kind of impression given by the airlines is dangerous.
Now, could this be a freak expression, or might it be a glimpse into the way a lot of people in China think?
It's not in China things. It is sometimes the people in different parts also thought. It's a prejudice. They have the assumptions that some communities are having the criminal backgrounds. These people are behaving in this manner. They put everybody in one basket. That is wrong. You cannot put everybody in one basket. There are individuals, crime or criminal activities are not monopoly of one race or one community. It is criminals could be in any community, anywhere. So what they need to do is that if they think there's high crime rate, they can say that there are certain areas where the people need to be careful.
But this has not
from the communities.
But this has not been so thought out, it seems. It's just a general prejudice that they've just gone to town with.
Yeah, I think that somebody just thought they had a prejudice. It must be, it's not a small magazine of a small organization. It's a very large airline, very reputable as I understand. Then this magazine, putting in this must be done on a research based, must be done. If not, then it is a mistaken.
Sharma ji, thank you for taking this up and for talking to us.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
And now to a question that's been on everyone's minds. Everyone who travels between Britain and India, certainly it's been on the mind of businessmen in Britain and India. How long before Sainsbury's, Tesco, Waitrose open branches in India? It may not be long under new Indian laws. Those laws are now being implemented by the Food Processing Ministry. We spoke to the Food Processing Minister, Harsimrat Badal, in London. Food Processing Minister Harsimrat Kaur Badal has had some apparently appetizing meetings with investors and potential investors in London. So, Mrs. Badal, what is on the investment menu?
Lots on the plate. I would say that there has been a lot of interest globally ever since this new government has come in, and in our latest budget we have opened up FDI and multi-brand retail of food which is produced and manufactured in India. So I have been receiving a lot of queries, a lot of interested people. As soon as we have got the policies, the T's crossed and the I's dotted and the fine print out, people have been asking. So I've decided to go to all the major countries to speak to people over there and to see how we can attract these big retail chains into India.
And when will the T's and I's get done?
They're all done. That's why I'm here, because now we've got the T's and I's done. FDI was announced in the budget in 28th of February this year. So it took a little bit of time to get the fine print out, and the policy is absolutely ready, which is why I'm here selling the policy to all the big brand retailers all over.
And have there been buyers for the policy? You had meetings with Sainsbury, Tesco, Marks and Spencer, their business leaders. What has been their response?
Meeting with the in charges of the food trade in all the sections that you're talking about: Tesco, Sainsbury, Waitrose, Marks and Spencer, Holland and Barrett, Harrods, every chain possible, and everybody's shown a lot of interest in different kind of fields. And I think this meeting with them has actually cleared a lot of the doubts that they had. Plus, we're planning to hold a World Food Summit in India along Vibrant Gujarat.
From the sidelines, we are told of Vibrant Gujarat.
That's right, and they're all really interested in that, because I plan to make that a platform where all our big, small, medium retailers of India, all our food manufacturers, all our mega food park owners, state representatives, as well as all these international big giants of the retail chains can come there and actually interact and see where they would like to fit in their markets into India. I think India has the potential to become the food factory for the world. We're close to a lot of the food importing nations. We have a large middle class which is looking for proper retail outlets in the organized sector. It's a market which is waiting to happen and to boom. And that's why the interest by all countries. In fact, I was in Italy just 2 days ago, and the moment the minister found out that the food processing ministers here, they've requested me to come back in 2 weeks to hold all the meetings with their food processors, and I'm going back to Rome.
Italy, of course, I mean, they are pioneers in food processing technology, so they would clearly have an interest in food processing development of that in India. But here in London, you've had meetings with the people from the leaders from Sainsbury, Tesco. For example, what exactly is it that they want?
Actually, everybody is looking at a different niche, since they all represent different niches. Tesco has a lot of stores which sells to the masses. Simply Food of Marks and Spencer's has a different niche. I went to Partridge's today, which is a totally family-owned thing, but I see potential for them as well, because along with what they sell, they also have cafes. So that's another niche. Waitrose has another niche, Sainsbury has another niche. So there's a lot of interest. I think a lot of them are interested in tying up with local partners first, so that they get a feel of the market and put their toe in and see how it goes before they go further. A lot of them have worked or are already working with some people. Some have had a bit of a not so pleasant experience in the past, which makes them wary, but seeing the environment and the way India has been looking in the last 2 years, they're all very keen to look that side. And I say, as far as Britain is concerned, with Brexit happening, everybody is rethinking their future strategies, and that's why they're looking at business in a different way, and all of them need to up their business models.
You mentioned Brexit, and of course, as we know, the free trade agreement with the EU has been held up for a very long time, and some of the concerns India has had have been over matters that you are considering. A lot of companies want the Indian market opened up to their agricultural produce, and there has been obvious and very strong resistance to that. Where do your meetings sit in relation to those negotiations?
That's being handled by the Commerce Ministry, and as a government we are committed to safeguarding our own people and our own farmers first. So I would not like to comment on what is being negotiated by another ministry. But as far as retail and food processing is concerned, the food processing industries which comes under me, there was already FDI allowed in the indirect route earlier, in the automatic route, and now of course multi-brand FDI has been opened up totally for the retail sector. So this is a new step, and like I said, that's what we are here to promote, because we have, as far as food is concerned, almost a $600 billion business in India, and this is something which is set to treble in the next 3 years. An average Indian spends almost 40% of his income on food. And with this huge population, which is the second largest in the world, and the average age being 25 years, 50% of the population, this burgeoning middle class which is looking for ready-to-cook fast food and all the variety possible, the retail sector is the demand of the hour, and India is ready for it. And that's what I think all these people understand, and that's why they want to come to India.
It does seem that India is seeing a lot of promise via Bathinda. Thank you very much, Mrs. Badal, for talking to
Thank
us.
you so much.
But that's it for now. We'll have very much more to share with you through the week on News 18 and on the weekend on the UK edition.